Have you ever thought about how one of the deadliest pandemics in human history could have secretly sparked an economic revolution? It sounds crazy, right? But the Black Death, which wiped out a massive portion of Europe's population in the mid-14th century, did just that. It was a tragedy of unimaginable scale, but for those who survived, especially the peasants, it triggered a series of events that would change their world forever. Today, we're diving deep into the unseen economic boom that rose from the ashes of the Black Death. Before the plague, Europe was trapped in the rigid system of feudalism. Most people were serfs, tied to the land they worked, with little freedom and even less pay. Their lives were controlled by lords and noblemen. They had no bargaining power, no hope for a better future. It was a system built on a massive, cheap labor force. But then, the Black Death arrived, and everything changed. Imagine a world where overnight, up to half the population disappears. That's what happened. Suddenly, the most valuable resource wasn't land or gold, it was people. The labor shortage was so severe that the entire economic landscape was turned upside down. For the first time in centuries, the power started to shift away from the lords and into the hands of the common worker. Think about it from a simple supply and demand perspective. With far fewer workers available, those who survived could demand higher wages. If one lord refused to pay, a peasant could simply pack up and go to the next manor, where the lord was desperate for help to harvest his crops. This was revolutionary. Before the plague, leaving the land you were tied to was unthinkable, often illegal. Now, lords were competing with each other for laborers, forcing them to offer better pay and better working conditions just to keep their estates from falling apart. Wages for agricultural workers and artisans skyrocketed. We have records showing that in some parts of England, wages for farm laborers doubled or even tripled in the years immediately following the plague. A thresher who might have earned a couple of pence a day before 1348 could now command much more. This wasn't just a small pay bump, this was a life-altering increase in income. For the first time, many peasants had disposable income. They could afford better food, better clothing, and maybe even save a little. This newfound wealth had a ripple effect across the economy. With more money in their pockets, peasants started stimulating local markets. They weren't just subsisting anymore, they were becoming consumers. This increased demand for goods and services, which further fueled economic activity. Blacksmiths, carpenters, and other craftsmen also benefited from this new class of customers. Of course, the nobility and ruling class didn't just sit back and watch their power erode, they tried to fight back. Across Europe, governments enacted laws to try and control wages, forcing them back down to pre-plague levels. In England, they passed the Statute of Labourers in 1351. These laws aimed to cap wages and restrict the movement of workers. But how do you enforce such a law when you're desperate for people to work your land? For the most part, these measures failed. The economic reality of the labor shortage was just too powerful. Workers and employers often ignored the laws, making deals under the table. The plague also dramatically changed how land was used. With fewer people to work the fields, many lords found it impossible to continue large-scale grain farming, which was very labor-intensive. So what did they do? They adapted. Many switched to less labor-intensive activities like sheep farming. Raising sheep for wool required far fewer hands than plowing and harvesting wheat. This shift not only made economic sense, but also contributed to the growth of England as incredibly profitable wool and textile industry, which would become a cornerstone of its economy for centuries to come. Furthermore, with so much vacant land available, land prices plummeted. For peasants who had managed to accumulate some savings from their higher wages, this was an incredible opportunity. They could now afford to rent or even buy their own plots of land. This was the beginning of the end for serfdom. As more peasants became independent farmers, the old feudal bonds that tied them to a lord's estate began to dissolve. They were no longer serfs, but free laborers and landowners. This represents one of the greatest shifts in social mobility in European history. A family that had been tied to the same piece of land for generations could suddenly envision a future where their children owned their own farm. This new economic freedom also spurred innovation. With labor being expensive, landowners had a strong incentive to find more efficient ways of doing things. This period saw the increased adoption of technologies that could save labor, like more advanced plows and water mills. The redistribution of wealth and the shift in power dynamics created a more dynamic and innovative agricultural economy. People were forced to think differently and find new solutions to new problems. The long-term consequences of this economic revolution were profound. The decline of feudalism, the rise of a free labor market, and the increase in social mobility laid the groundwork for the modern world. Some historians argue that this economic shift was a crucial precursor to the Renaissance. With more wealth distributed among a wider portion of the population, there was more patronage for art, science, and culture. It created a society that was more dynamic, more individualistic, and more open to new ideas. The old, rigid medieval world was breaking down, and a new, more modern one was beginning to emerge. So, while the Black Death was an undeniable human catastrophe, Its aftermath reveals a fascinating and complex story of economic transformation. It shows how, even in the darkest of times, seeds of change can be sown. The survivors, through a combination of luck and newfound leverage, managed to dismantle a centuries-old system of oppression and build a better future for themselves and their descendants. From the tragedy of the plague came an unexpected opportunity that reshaped European society and set it on a path toward capitalism and the modern age. It's a powerful reminder that history is never simple. It's full of contradictions, unintended consequences, and hidden stories of resilience and change. The economic boom for the peasants after the Black Death is one of the most compelling of them all. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this journey into the past as fascinating as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden stories that shaped our world. Let me know in the comments what other historical events you'd like to explore. See you in the next video.